Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Charles Chauvel.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the Government held a review of archaeological consenting processes within the Historic Places Act in response to some anecdotal evidence, at least, that processes might not have been as streamlined as they might have been. And the focus of the review was solely on ensuring that statutory processes were efficient and streamlined, and in particular to reduce any potential for duplication with processes under the Resource Management Act. So it's instructive to compare the results of that review with the regulatory impact statement on this bill. Statement notes there were 3 different types of authority provisions under the current legislation. There wasn't really an alignment of processing times between archaeological authorities and resource consent. There was excessive processing time, in some cases up to 6 months, and the Māori Heritage Council of the Trust did not have input into all applications for archaeological authorities affecting sites of interest to Māori. Although it's interesting to note that the Ministry for Culture and Heritage in the regulatory impact statement notes that overall problem is likely to be small, with only 350 applications a year, so that the rationale for the review was based not on direct evidence of a problem, but of perceptions of a problem. To the extent that the review was one of the prompters for a redraft of the Act, it is helpful, I think, to look at the provisions of the bill and to consider the main changes. We've heard a summary of them, or of some of them, from the Minister. Obviously, there's going to be a change of the name of the New Zealand Historic Places Trust to Heritage New Zealand Pouhere Taonga, Heritage New Zealand in brackets, and a reform of the governance and structure. Currently, the Trust has a board, it has the Māori Heritage Council, and it has branch committees which comprise fee-paying members. As the Minister observed, the bill will disestablish the branch committees. It will remove the 3 positions for elected board members that currently exist on the board and create 2 new positions for the board members, which will be appointed by the Minister himself. On processes, the bill proposes to reduce the maximum timeframes for Heritage New Zealand to process applications, and will align those timeframes with the now well-known procedures that exist under the Resource Management Act. And it introduces a simplified application process for proposals that have only a minor effect on archaeology. And as far as emergency authorities are concerned, Heritage New Zealand will have the ability to process archaeological authorities' applications more speedily following a state of emergency, basically by shortening timeframes and including weekends and public holidays in the calculation of timeframes. Sir, Labour supports the sending of the bill to the Select Committee. The Local Government and Environment Select Committee, I believe, was the committee that the Minister nominated. And it is appropriate that the bill should receive scrutiny at that committee. I think the issues for the opposition that we'll want careful scrutiny paid to are the dispensing with branch committees. We're concerned whenever public input into an entity is diminished, and it does seem to us that getting rid of or disbanding the branch committees does need some thought, does need some examination at the Select Committee. The Minister, I'm sure, wouldn't want to see public input from the members jeopardised, and we need to see, I think, clearly that isn't going to occur as a result of removing the branch committees from the structure. Likewise, the removal of the 3 members of the existing board who represent the branch committees. The risk, obviously, there is again a diminution of public input into the affairs of what is now known as the Historic Places Trust, and we would want to see and hear assurances from advisors and others at the committee and test the evidence on that point that isn't going to lead to the current membership of the Trust feeling that they're disempowered that their opportunities for input into the organisation, which at the moment are an important aspect of the affairs of the Trust, are not diminished or discouraged. It will, I think, be important in the Select Committee process to exercise vigilance to ensure that the bill in fact strengthens governance and input opportunities and does not come at the expense of the protection of archaeological heritage and public participation in safeguarding that heritage. So that's, I think, the prime concern that the opposition would express at the way in which the bill's drafted, and is probably the primary issue that we'll be wanting to test at Select Committee. And I think it's also appropriate to make the point that while Labor supports measures to reduce unnecessary costs and delays, as I said earlier, in respect of the regulatory impact statement to the bill, the Ministry has noted that one of the major overall problems that the bill would seek to address is small and likely to remain so. The evidence is that there was, I think, only 350 applications a year that would be affected by one of the major reforms in the bill. So, Sir, there is a legitimate question around, in the face of stagnant economic growth, record migration to Australia, persistently high unemployment and increasing numbers of children suffering from poverty-related illnesses, whether this is really a priority issue for the government at this time. But if it is, then the question has to be asked why it's taken the Minister 2 years after Cabinet asked him to report on the consent process to actually bring changes to the Parliament. So, Sir, we'll be keen, I think, as I say, at Select Committee to test whether or not this is, in fact, a measure that will lead to better processes, better governance and better public input to the entity that will be known as Heritage New Zealand Pouhere Taonga. And despite the reservations that I've mentioned and the nasty little partisan speech that we heard before on the introduction of the bill, Labor will support this legislation to Select Committee.
Nikki Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support this Heritage New